Please welcome the Director of Michigan Programs for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Yazid Moore.
Good morning. My name is Yazid Moore, and I'm the Director of Michigan Programs at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. At the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, we're driven by the vision of a world where every child has the opportunity to thrive. Yet, the systems that affect most young children, food, health, education, and economy, are not working for everyone. This has lifelong consequences for children, families, and communities. With children at the center of everything we do at the Kellogg Foundation, our work supports community-driven solutions as we fund programs, services, and efforts to change systems so they work better for everyone. By listening to communities, developing leaders, and working toward racial equity and racial healing, we join partners to help children and families have the greatest opportunity for success here in Michigan and in our other places. This time last year, actually in this very same room, we held a session on making Michigan the best place to live, learn, earn, and work for those here and those we want to attract for greater growth and prosperity. This year's conference theme, Michigan's Equation for Impact, both build on last year's session and positions us for our discussion today as we think about the potential of artificial intelligence in the frame of people, talent, industry, technology, infrastructure, and partnerships toward meaningful action to ensure our continued progress. As Michigan continues to position itself as a national leader in innovation and economic opportunity, we stand at a critical crossroads. Emerging technologies, especially artificial intelligence, are not just reshaping industries, but redefining how we prepare, attract, and retain talent across our state. Today's session is centered on a bold but essential question. How can we harness AI to support Michigan's talent strategies and ensure that our workforce is equipped to thrive both now and in the future? We'll focus on tangible, near-term investment opportunities that can lay the groundwork for long-term success. That includes building capacity within our systems, strengthening the infrastructure that supports innovation, and most importantly, investing in people, our students, our workers, and our communities up and down across the mitten. But this work doesn't happen in isolation. Real progress requires collaboration across sectors. Philanthropy, education, nonprofits, business, and government all have a unique and vital role to play in shaping an inclusive innovation ecosystem, one that uplifts every Michigander, regardless the zip code. This is more than a conversation about technology. It's about equity, access, and shared prosperity. It's about ensuring that as we grow Michigan's economy, we do so in a way that reflects our values and leverages the full potential of our communities. We're excited to dig into this important conversation with our panelists. We invite you to engage, ask questions, and imagine what's possible when we lead with both innovation and intention that's not just about technology, but about people, purpose, and the promise of a more equitable, dynamic future for Michigan. At this time, I'd like to ask our panelists to join me on the stage. First up, we have Jaman Alexander. Jaman is the president and CEO of West Michigan Center for Arts and Technology, best known as WMCAT. Jaman joined WMCAT in 2015 and now leads the organization's work to provide equitable access to opportunity. Most recently, as the Director of Workforce Development, Jaman spent 6 years growing the nationally recognized program that provides holistic support and career training to adults seeking living wage careers in the healthcare industry. A passionate nonprofit leader and professional, Jaman has held leadership roles at the YMCA of Greater Grand Rapids, Spectrum Health Foundation, and the Helen DeVos Children's Hospital. Next, we have Alex Coutron. As Chief Executive Officer of the AI Education Project, most commonly known as AIEDU, Alex oversees strategy, partnerships, fundraising, and external relations for the organization, which is a leader in making sure that all students are ready to live, work, and thrive in a world where AI is everywhere. Prior to founding AIEDU, Alex built the AI Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility function for H5, a pioneering AI company in the legal services sector. Prior to his time in the social impact and nonprofit space, Alex managed brand and policy communications for companies including Oracle, Airbnb, Nissan, and Adobe. And finally, we have Tiffany Taylor. Tiffany is a dynamic leader with over 2 decades of experience across education, nonprofit, for-profit, and public sectors. Currently, she serves as partner and co-president at ASGSV Summit and a partner at Global Silicon Valley Ventures, a leading venture capital firm focused on the $7 trillion education and workforce skills sector. Previously, Tiffany served as executive director of Teach for America Detroit, where she expanded fundraising, set strategic vision, and led regional operations. A native Detroiter.
Yes.
Tiffany is a proud product of Detroit Public School Systems. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage again today. We're going to ask for you to hold your questions and put the questions on the note card, and we'll collect them. And once we get to the Q&A, we'll bring that into the room. But we're here to talk about the present and future and all that kind of lies in between here. But before we jump into our conversation, just a quick grounding. I'd like to hear quickly from each of you. One word describes how you're entering this conversation, given this moment in time. Tiffany, would you
I would say curious. Right? I'm entering with a curious posture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jamal.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would say at this point, I'm open, right? Like open to appreciating what is, interrogating what is, open to new ideas that pushes my thinking forward, and also open to just like letting go of some old ways of doing.
Okay. And Alex?
Worried.
Okay. 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 Worried. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good segue, Alex, as you talk about worried. Let's go to this question about this intro to AI, as a grounding for our discussion. And when you think about AI, I always thought about Rosie from the Jetsons, right? Or AI, Allen Iverson, right? So, but AI has a much more impactful meaning. So, Alex, as you kind of think about that, what is AI and its importance as we think about talent, education, work, and industry?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get lost in the semantics of artificial intelligence. I think for our purposes, just think about artificial intelligence as a prediction machine. So using computers to make predictions about all kinds of things, predicting how cars should drive, predicting what text should follow based on an input. But really functionally, AI is a technology that has over the last 3 years sort of shifted from relatively esoteric machine learning for mature industrial applications, content recommendation, advertising, fraud prevention. But it's shifted. It's shifted into an extremely broad multi-purpose tool, and it is replacing people. It is replacing tasks, but when you replace enough tasks, you need fewer people. And the type of folks that are getting replaced are some of the most common occupations in Michigan. Office and administrative functions like 12% of jobs in the state, and that is probably the low-hanging fruit for AI. AI is good at transcribing, at taking notes, at writing memos, writing emails, writing press releases, and so it's important to sort of step back and really think not just about what is this technology capable of today, what does it mean today, but also, if you're in middle school. Or even in high school, you're 8 to 10 years away from your first job. Yeah. And so we have a responsibility to also kind of have that big picture thinking about what is the world going to look like for these kids that are going to be entering a world that will likely look very different from the one today.
When you think about that intro, Alex, just in terms about this vision and opportunity for it, right? It's this big concept, right? And so, as Michigan looks to kind of become this hub for this innovation, right, for AI, why is now the right time to act as you kind of think about that?
I mean, it's at our doorstep. It's basically if you look at the last 50 years, I'm from Ohio, secretly. I have a lot of family in Michigan. Aunt and uncle are in Dearborn, so I consider myself an honorary Michigander. But the Midwest, the Rust Belt, it was hit really hard with previous automation, mechanistic automation, globalization, offshoring. But if you look at the job loss that happened over the last 50 years, it didn't happen gradually. It wasn't like little by little each year, a few more jobs went away. This happened in acute moments. In fact, it happens really in the 12 months following recessions over the last 50 years. And we haven't had a recession since 2008. So we have 16, 17 years of technology overhang that's just waiting in the wings for this moment where businesses are going to be compelled to use technology to help them reduce costs. And I'm not going to predict when the next recession will happen, but I don't think it's 5 to 10 years away. I think most observers would say that we're actually potentially quite close. And so that will really be the moment where things accelerate. And so we have very little time to take some steps. And the states that move quickly will win the future. And this isn't the rules of Silicon Valley being the epicenter of this, that doesn't have to hold. It really is all about where are we setting the conditions for business and education and policy to create those opportunities for not just young kids, but really the entire ecosystem.
Thanks for that. Jamon, I want to bring you into the conversation. As you hear Alex talks about the vision, the opportunity for AI, can you kind of unpack, as you think about the work that you're leading, the brilliant work that you're leading at WMCAT, right? How do you see AI leveraging and supporting your efforts in the areas of education, reskilling, and workforce development?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the question. So our vision at WMCAT is truly about equitable access to opportunity, and there's a number of different ways we live that out. One of them is tuition-free adult workforce development and cybersecurity. And we sort of view like AI and any sort of emerging technology as a tool and a strategy like in pursuit of that vision, right? So AI is a tool and a strategy in pursuit of that vision. And we started out by talking about the moment. I think it's important to talk a little bit about the moment in a little more detail because I think one, it names why this is important, like why everything Alex said is important, and then also informs how we individually and collectively go about addressing the challenge, right? So if you really think about it, the pandemic that felt like so long ago was 5 years ago, like it really shifted the ways in which we learn, the ways in which we work, and it's likely true for you as well, like our relationships to institutions, our relationships to each other, right? It's like simultaneously, as Alex said, these emerging technologies have made some career pathways vulnerable or disrupted them to the point where they're gone. Things like office functions, customer cares, even software development right now is at risk, right? So like we're living in a moment of like collective disruption, right? Now what that does and what AI has the potential to do is really allow us to potentially like reimagine a new future, reimagine a new path forward, sort of let go of some of those old ways, and really live into the country's stated ideals that one could argue we've never truly lived into, right? So just like a real quick question, just show of hands, who here would consider themselves to be an expert in AI? Okay, nobody. Competent.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe like 30, 40% of the room. And the reason why I want to do that visual is because the way we're viewing this at WMCAT is almost like, theoretically at least, like a mass like resetting of the workforce. Like because there's an opportunity because we're all learning and we're all adapting in real time. So, and I'll fast forward in a second, Yazid, I promise. But so when I think about what we're doing at WMCAT, right, is we're asking how might we connect families to the digital economy? How might we connect people to opportunities to build the systems, design the systems that we are actively practicing, right? Because like that is where thriving wage and family economic security is long term. So a couple years ago with support from Kellogg Foundation, and then if Mark Heisinger's in the room, shout out to him, we were able to launch cybersecurity, and now we're starting to incorporate AI into that, right? How can we leverage AI to improve clunky workflows? How can we leverage AI to guard against attacks on supply chain, which is the way things are headed. So there's a technical expertise and learning associated with it, but also we need to learn to think with it, to work with it, and that's going to require us to be adaptable, systems thinkers, design thinkers, emotionally intelligent human beings. So our model at WMCAT is combining that technical expertise, connecting people to actively using AI and designing the systems, but also not losing sight of the human element to ensure that they're not easily replaceable.
You know, I want to bring you into the conversation, Tiffany, and particularly, you've heard about institutions, sectors, education, nonprofits, business, and government. As you kind of think about that, right, How can those sectors kind of come together to kind of meld this moment that we're talking about right here?
You know, we have been in conversation, I mean, it's no secret, preparing for this conversation for the last few weeks. And as I sit on this stage, I am taken back to a moment when we started talking about just the future and how we need to ready ourselves, how we need to ready our youngest learners for what is to come. And Jaman, you just talked about how do we let go of some of the old ways. When I think about cross-sector collaboration, when I think about truly engaging with our community, I think we honestly need to hold on to some of the things that we've learned in the last 5, 10, 15 years about truly and authentically engaging partners across industries and within communities, and actually shifting our orientation and our mindset about our ability to only do work in partnership. When I think about one of our partners over at AIEDU and at GSV, Ties, they're building regional ecosystems all across the country and in some instances outside of the country. And it's the things that we know. They have joint funding opportunities. They have regional labs where they are creating AI mobile units that are allowing the community from the policy level to the practitioner level to create, to test, and then to pivot quickly. And so I think we have to understand that all of that is standing on the foundation of a shared purpose, right, and a shared commitment. And there's a lot of sacrifice and give and take, and those are the principles of community collaboration and cross-sector collaboration that are old, right, and that are tested and true. And so as we think about the future, as we think about the emerging technologies, as we think about this intersection of learning and AI, I encourage us to make sure we're holding on to those principles that have allowed us to authentically engage in ways that are no longer performative in nature to move the work forward.
Alex, I'd like to bring you in that piece around this role of cross-sector collaboration, particularly to Tiffany's point of being intentional around that community-based innovation piece as we think about the ecosystem at the level, about the sectors coming together. Any thoughts or feedback on that?
Yeah, I think, in the spaces that Tiffany and I are often in, there's this, there's a lot of talk about, we need to empower communities to sort of be a part of this. And there's almost this like a God complex coming out of the technology sector that we just need to help people, lift them up by their bootstraps and have a seat at the table. And I think that actually misses something more fundamental, which is if you think about what's happening now, there's all of this AI capability, and the AI is incredibly powerful even today. We could stop all future development, and we would have enough capability to replace a lot of jobs, do a lot of amazing, and potentially complicated things. What is standing in the way? The bottleneck is not the capability of the technology. The bottleneck is the human capacity and the understanding of the specific domains in which AI is has the potential to impact. And so if you think about all the different places, and let's talk about Michigan, if you think about all the different ways in which AI can be a force multiplier for Michigan communities, for Michigan businesses, for the education system, the missing link is not the technology or expertise even in the technology itself. The missing link is the expertise in the industries that are poised to harness that technology. And so in that way, community-based work, partnership-based work is not just about helping those communities. It's about those communities are actually the secret weapon for this being the game changer it is. And I really do believe that the future of AI economic opportunity is not in a small number of, there will be a small number of big AI companies that will win the day in terms of the foundation models, but a lot of the economic opportunity will actually be in the smaller industries that are fast movers in figuring out how do we implement these tools in a way that really meets the needs and demands and opportunities for the communities, the customers, clients that we serve. And so in that way, you may not be an expert in artificial intelligence, but you are an expert in for the constituents that you serve wherever your seat is. And so I think really sort of shifting the narrative to how do we harness the communities as opposed to just empower them, which is, I know it's semantic, but I think it's really important.
And I think, just to build off of
Please.
that, I think sometimes when we talk about collaboration or community engagement, there's this box that we want to check. We invited the right people, right? We have representation from, the east side of Detroit. I'm a proud east sider. I don't know if we got any east side folks from the east side here. All right, we have our folks from the east side. We got our folks from the west side. We got folks from southwest. But when they get to the table, it's about convening and it's not about co-creation.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they get to the table, we often mute their voices and say, we actually have a vision, we just want your buy-in, or we want to leverage your credibility within a community to help us get to the implementation stage. And so it's about agreed, not just empowering, but actually saying, I see you as an expert because of who you are and what you bring to the table, and I can't do this work without you. And that is agreed. That's the power that we could have in Michigan if we set that standard.
Actually, I want to pull on that thread a little bit more around the community piece and keep that light at that edge of the stage right there. And so, as we kind of think about this growth and AI and job creation, how do we ensure that it benefits all Michiganders, right? Particularly those historically underserved communities. And Tiffany, I want to stay there with you for some reaction to that.
So I'll say this. I know where I work. I know I am a board member for AI EDU. I think sometimes the conversation about equitable access to AI can be a distraction, right? For us to ensure that we are truly trying to disrupt the inequities that exist within our community that are barriers for economic mobility, we have to stay focused on the equity work that we have been doing prior to emerging technologies becoming a part of every major headline. And I wonder if that actually is going to hold us back from being able to actually see the results and reach every learner, because we're so focused on, I need this work to be equitable for the students in Detroit or for the students in Flint, but we're losing the focus of the broader picture, right? And if we do that, we're just going to layer on this technology to inequitable systems, and we're going to automate those inequitable systems and the racial wealth gaps that we've been fighting against, right? The opportunity gaps that we've been working to disrupt, they're just going to continue to widen. And so I would say, we cannot let AI be a distraction in this moment. We have to see it as a tool and not the strategy, and continue the equity work and invest in those leaders who have been doing the equity work and bring them into as real partners.
I think, Javon, that's a really, really nice segue to because you've been one of those leaders. Yes, please. You've been one of those leaders who's doing that work. And so, your response is, in terms about how do we ensure that access is open, right, in the way that Tiffany's kind of talked about?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, WMCAT is 20 years old now, so we've been centering and/or co-designing with communities, for a long time, as it relates to adult workforce development and then also visual media arts. But one of the ways that I think could help the room picture how we can go about doing this, because I think a lot of the how still remains to be determined. I think about there's this framework called the curb cut effect, and if you're familiar with this, I believe it was in the 1960s in Berkeley, California, where there were people who were part of the disabled community. And they had difficulties traversing the streets in their wheelchairs, right? So what they did was they created makeshift ramps, which allow for greater accessibility, way more safe ways to travel. And ultimately what that led to was lobbying with the city to cut curbs and create a greater access for people who were using wheelchairs. What it also did was create a greater access for folks who were bicyclists, folks who were pulling luggage or pushing strollers or skateboarding, that sort of thing. So the lesson is, if we think about it, the most vulnerable groups among us, and if we could design for them, then it benefits the overall society as a whole, right? And I think the same is true in the context of this AI conversation, right? Whether that's job creation, integrating AI into our current ways of working, we need to ensure that the most vulnerable groups are to your point, Tiffany, at the table with us, designing with us, and ensuring that those gaps that we are currently experiencing don't persist. So like that's kind of one of the ways that I'm thinking about this as it relates to AI. I'm thinking about like models like WIMCAT, where just one, there's AI ADU, there's Automation Works, there's all sorts of different pockets of really good things happening across the state. What can we learn, right? Like what can we learn from these pockets? What's working, what's not working, and then I do think we have the potential to scale this at a regional and state level.
So, as we think about AI and the platform to deliver AI, we kind of think about our education and learning systems, right? And so, Alex, I want to bring you back into the conversation when we think about Michigan's education systems, K-12, higher ed, folk training. How can Michigan's education kind of evolve to kind of prepare learners for this AI-enabled economy as you think about this?
Yeah, it's sometimes people are surprised, when they come into conversations, they expect me to sort of like help paint this vision of how do we help kids harness AI tools. And there's sort of this idea that the digital divide is going to look something like, the kids who really are able to use AI, they're going to be the ones that are ahead, and the kids who don't have access to the AI, they're going to be the ones who are left behind. And that's sort of what the current digital divide looks like. And I actually think that's wrong. I think if like 10 years from now, like make no mistake, the digital divide is going to look like the poor kids are going to have all the AI. They're going to have the AI classrooms, the AI tutors, the AI gamified learning systems, the AI avatars. And the rich kids are going to be in private schools with teacher-centered classrooms. They're going to be reading the classics. They're going to be having classroom debates, doing project-based learning. They're going to be building durable skills. Because the thing about AI is like, if you go back to 2007, imagine if you went back to 2007, would you really spend your effort pushing for mobile phone literacy? Like, the idea that us adults are going to teach kids how to use AI is silly. It's like they're already way ahead of us. And in fact, if you think about like cheating in the classroom, it's really replace the word cheating with shortcut. And the issue is that teachers are they're being outmaneuvered by their kids who are just more adept at using these tools. So what does that mean for education? Well, if you look at industries that have been early movers and adopters in generative AI, especially language models, what we see is that the most effective users of AI tools are not people that are super good at prompt engineering, that memorize all the perfect things to type into the system. Like, you actually don't need to prompt engineer as much anymore. The reasoning models over the last 3 months have been prompting themselves. What makes a difference is you have to have domain expertise for the thing that you're using the AI for. Yeah. And so if we abstract that to education, at AIDU, we actually work with schools not as much to implement AI tools, but actually to evolve, not revolutionize, but just to evolve education to make sure we're doing a better job teaching math. Like, math proficiency is still very important. Like, being able to read and write is the critical ingredient for good prompt engineering, because at the end of the day, if you don't know what a good essay looks like, how are you going to use AI to write a good essay, right? Like ultimately, when we say we need critical consumers of AI or critical users of AI, well, you can't be a good critic if you don't know what good looks like. So in many ways, school doesn't change very much in terms of the goals that we have. The problem is that we are failing largely in education today because students are disengaged. I think Jamie at Michigan Virtual and I were chatting about this yesterday. I think it's like 1 in 3 students in the state miss more than 18 days of school per year. They don't feel like learning is relevant. They're doing multiple choice exams and homework. They're being asked to write essays about topics that they don't really care about. And so the power of AI is probably something like, can we use AI to make learning more engaging and help teachers crack one of the most vexing challenges, which is how do we integrate project-based learning while teaching to the standards that we have? And AI actually is probably quite good at that, but it's teacher-centered. It's not the tool for the sake of the tool.
Can I
Please.
just jump in there? So as a former classroom teacher, this conversation matters so much to me because I also think sometimes we jump over our educators to talk about solutions for our students. And so I think the same issues and concerns that Alex has at the student level, we should be as equally concerned about the products, the tools, the platforms that are being pushed and shoved into our districts for our teachers. And I think what we're seeing is this over-index on productivity. This is going to save you time. You don't have to lesson plan anymore. We're going to do all of the assessments for you. And we had this conversation about productive struggle. Yes, when I was a sixth grade special education teacher, I spent 6 hours every Sunday writing lesson plans, creating differentiated instruction for Ramar versus Jamal, but it built my muscle as a practitioner. And so I worry that some of these tools are, yes, saving our educators time, but it's removing that productive struggle that actually makes them effective practitioners of their craft. And so I think we have to make sure that we hold that truth up as we are leveraging these technologies in our classrooms and our systems across the board.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that whole like building muscle thing, and like,
Yeah.
as you both were talking, I was reflecting on my own like K-12 experience, and then even getting into higher ed. And when I'm really like honest and transparent with myself, I could say I got really good at mastering the process of school, right? Because like, and again, I don't want to project onto anyone else's like educational experience, but for a lot of kids who can follow processes, then you're often rewarded for that. It was adulthood where I really learned how to learn.
Yeah.
Is thought one, and reflected on my past lived experience to really uncover some of those attributes that I use in my work today. Things like emotional intelligence, adaptability,
Yes.
curiosity, systems thinking, design thinking, like all of the things that you talked about as it relates to developing the human capacity. So again, looking at my experience, I'd like to see education continue to evolve to prepare young people to be learners, to be leaders, to actively engage in their communities, and all of that will complement, in my opinion, the emerging technologies that we'll be using.
And putting that all together too, and Alex, I want to bring you back into the conversation, particularly as we talk about near-term investments, and that could be capital or that can be human, right, in terms of those investments. And so, in your mindset, what are some of those actionable investment opportunities in AI-related infrastructure or capacity of workforce that Michigan should be pursuing or preparing ourselves for the next 12, 18 months when we leave here after the session, right? And so getting into the present, but also the things that we need to be doing to prepare ourselves. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to need a massive amount of investment. Like, this is going to be one of the, right now, AI is sort of the protagonist in the story. AI is, unlocking potential, and how do we use AI to do X, Y, Z. But we're also starting to see, slowly but surely, companies are doing layoffs. And they're starting to talk about the fact that, we used, IBM used AI to automate, 80% of their HR function, and Microsoft used AI to automate, a significant share of their coding, and so did Google, and so did Klarna. And at some point, there's going to be this shift from protagonist to AI being the antagonist, and at that moment, there's going to be intense political will. Because people are going to be scared, they're going to be looking over their shoulders, and no job is safe. I mean, well, a few. Politicians are probably safe. Teachers, I think, are safe. Tradesmen. But a lot of jobs traditionally seen as the safe jobs. Knowledge work. Yeah. And so there will be a moment where there's going to be sort of this reflexive desire to do stuff, and that will be the moment where I think there's going to be huge infusions of government funding, probably not just at the state level, but at the federal level. I think the question now is, how do we make sure that we're building the foundations and the infrastructure so that we can actually harness that energy in a positive and productive way? Because as we've seen time and time again, operating in a moment of crisis is not the best. That is not the best condition. So to be less sort of obscure, investing in teacher capacity building, like teacher training, systems capacity building. So how do we make sure that, not just teachers, but the building leaders, superintendents, the RSAs, and then also going in community college and redefining community college from the fallback option for the kids that don't get into four-year degrees to a really high potential, agile pathway that is going to give you the chance to stack credentials and sort of stay, nimble as the job market changes. There's I think a really important role for community college, and four-year universities are going to be in a lot of trouble because they there's not the incentive structure to, MBA programs, enrollment in MBA programs is down 50%, and only 3 MBA programs have closed. Like nobody is going to raise their hand and say, you know what, I don't know that we actually really should be charging students $60,000 a year for a computer science degree, because the job prospects just aren't there. And that's why I think, looking for opportunities for government and for philanthropy to actually try to demonstrate what change looks like in the places where we can. And so I think state universities could be really powerful here as well. But the early, like K-12 education is, I think, the most urgent. Those kids are going to be the ones hit by far the hardest. And I think there's power in the ubiquity of, every student is part of public education. Like, we can really have this massive broad-based impact across the state if we figure out how to do it at the systems level.
When you talk about the systems level and you talk about government and philanthropy kind of joining that space, and earlier some of the conversations we were having around this community piece, right, the engagement piece. And so when you kind of think about that, and I want to bring this question to you, Tiffany and Jamon as well, what role should local communities, as Alex kind of thinks about the statewide space, right, but local communities and grassroots organizations, what role should they play in shaping what that innovation looks like at the regional level as it relates to the work?
I think it goes back to much of what we discussed previously. It has to start there, right? The residents, the students, the family members, the local leaders, they understand what the needs are. They have the proximity, right, that policymakers, sometimes even superintendents, sometimes even teachers do not have. And that's not something that we don't know. I think what has to shift is that we have to believe that there's value in that. And that requires myself and everyone in this room to shift how we operate. And I think that it's starting there, but it's also redefining our belief in who can innovate and where innovation can happen. It doesn't just happen in labs. It doesn't just happen in universities. It doesn't just happen in Silicon Valley. It actually is happening in our libraries, in our micro schools, in our classrooms, in our community centers, in our social service agencies. So we need to look to the Black Family Developments. We need to look to the United Ways of the world. They have the access to so many of our local leaders, and we have to ensure that it starts there in a very meaningful way. I remember when I joined GSV, there was this just deep belief that, educators need to learn from entrepreneurs, right? They need to learn how to be innovators. And I said, hold on, right? Educators are innovators and entrepreneurs in our own right? Every day when we enter that classroom, we are pivoting, we are coming up with new solutions. And we actually need entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs who are creating K-12 solutions, to learn from educators, to truly understand the priorities and the objectives that they have, not just academically, but as it relates to the social and emotional well-being of our students before they put together their most valuable product, right, that they want to pitch to us. And so I think we have to, it's a mindset shift, right? And I think that's sometimes hard for us to wrap our mind around when we're having these conversations about AI and emerging technologies. But for us to really ensure that we are setting up the work to be led by community, we have to value them, right? And we have to start the work there, not bring them into work that we've already created and that we're trying to fit them into.
Yeah. Please, So yeah, Tiffany just said a whole word, right? So I have a whole lot to add to it. I want to pick up on one of the things she said around like how we value people, and then even a mindset shift. Like if you think about it in dominant culture, there's all sorts of narratives that we've inherited that we just use, right? We often frame communities by their deficits instead of by their assets, right?
Yes.
So we say things like at-risk youth, low-income populations. If you have a expensive attorney, you can reduce your tax liability. But if you're accessing public benefits, you're lazy. But this is smart business. You know what I mean? Like there's all sorts of narratives that we inherit that really inform how we value and how we approach communities. People might not know a whole lot about the domain, right? Like AI. We're all learning that in real time. But one, people and families, like they know what they want. They know what they need, they know what their aspirations are, and there's all sorts of like beauty and brilliance that comes from how a lot of us grew up, the ingenuity, the creativity, the resilience, like all the things that workplace claims to look for. that's inherently embedded in our communities, right? So like how might we sort of flip the frame a little bit and sort of value some of these like non-traditional ways that people have learned certain things. And that's what we do at WMCAT. We invite our adult students to not only journey with us, but also inform our programming, to help design what the experience looks like, because ultimately our belief is that they're the experts. And that works for us. So like how might we sort of take what's happening in Detroit, mid-Michigan, Grand Rapids, learn from that, and then use that to scale out. And I think the public sector can play a big role in that.
When you think about that community space and it being rooted, and you're making sure that, those innovation efforts are there and voices brought in. Alex, I wanted to kind of pivot to you as well, too. You've seen this work nationally, right? What are some places that have gotten that right, or still kind of working into that angle to figure that out as well, too? What's been the pain point? What's also been the promise point as they kind of think about that work?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's still quite early on, so I think that's why this really is an opportunity. I mean, Ohio is probably the furthest along right now, and what happened in Ohio, and this is really the work that we helped to lead, was this combination of like going in the grassroots, going into schools, like demonstrating what does AI readiness look like at the school level, doing professional learning communities for teachers, school-based professional development for SOUPs, for central office staff, and then bringing in their ESCs in Ohio, Educational Service Centers, bringing in the ESCs to do regional, not just training, but convenings. We're bringing in we had over the last 3 months, over 1,000 superintendents and assistant SOUPs convening in every quadrant of the state. Department of Education gave us a grant to do that work. You had the chief integration officer introducing and sort of doing the welcome remarks for each of those convenings. We had the top-down support from the governor's office. And that combination is important because you use the air cover from government and some funding, but it wasn't that much. But it was the combination of resources, but also the sort of planting the flag and saying this is important. And what's unique about this moment, because folks who've been working in education, there's a lot of justified heartburn from, we've been trying to do systems transformation, systems change for decades. Project-based learning is not a new concept. The NAEP scores are trending down, not up. And so I think folks are sort of exasperated. This is unique, though, the zeitgeist moment about AI. And if you look at any presidential campaign that's been successful, yes, they have a good message, and yes, they have the ground game and the field organization, but without exception, successful presidential campaigns also have this zeitgeist moment. It was the case for President Obama. It was the case for President Trump. And education has really lacked that. It's obviously important, but to the average person, it's really hard for them to really sort of wrap their head around complex things like systems change. AI is unique. AI is something that is inescapable. People are thinking about it. They're hearing about it every single day. They're reading about it in the news. They're using it. It's dinner table conversation. And so the opportunity is, and this is what we did in Ohio, but it's also happening in Colorado and California, is harnessing that energy, but pointing people in a clear direction, and then providing them with a clear sort of roadmap and blueprint. And so in Michigan, what that would look like is starting with a few school districts. Doesn't have to be the biggest ones, but starting a few school districts, and the opportunity for those district leaders is you can be the first in your state. You can pioneer this for your state. And then you get those folks along, and then you bring in the, sort of any community-based organization that provides support for schools, and help them plug in and help them demonstrate their role. And then suddenly you have a model that we can start to replicate. And at a certain point, the question is, well, could this be something that happens and is expanded statewide? And I don't think that needs to be a 5-year timeline. I think it could be done in 18 months. With the right support, and it would really help to have, whether it's the governor's office or just sort of anybody in government or politics that is willing to champion the effort. I think that is sort of the missing ingredient to change this from being an effort into a movement.
Yeah, and I guess that mindset shift that Tiffany talked about, and particularly with shifting role, about how education is happening. How do states kind of find themselves to kind of balancing all the responsibilities, shifting role, about where's that sweet spot that they find themselves to arrive at that moment right there?
Yeah, you know, I think I don't have a state that I can like point to that has done that well, and I think it's because it's so hard. And part of what's hard about it isn't because we don't have the previous knowledge of how to do work like this. I think part of it is the fear of the unknown, if we're being honest with ourselves. When you show up to spaces and we're trying to figure out the strategy, particularly around AI, particularly around how do we ready every level of the system, I think what's holding us back in this moment is fear, Yazid. And I know that sounds like a simple response, but I think once we can disrupt that fear and actually get a few wins under our belt, to Alex's point, launch some of these fellowships, launch some of these partnerships, invest in leaders, actually show that the work can be done, I think that will lead us to a moment or a proof point that will allow us to advance and get into the work more quickly. Yeah.
I'm going to go to the questions, as I know we're getting close to our wrap up, and so I always want to make sure that we bring the audience who took the time to put words on paper here, that we don't shortcut that. And so the first question is, how do we ensure that Michigan is ready, and not just specific companies? And Alex, I'll give that to you, and obviously Tiffany and Jamon, please feel free to opine as well.
Michigan as a state. I mean, I think it's also, it's I guess pulling out the question, maybe the premise is, you know, right now we have this sort of an understanding of what companies are going to be sort of early movers in using AI, what companies might be left behind, but that's going to change, and we don't really know what the industries of the future are really going to look like. I mean, we don't know what the growth industries are, especially when it comes to jobs. So if you abstract it to the state level, I think everybody needs to be on a learning journey. And so that, like, you know, I think Jamon really gave a bunch of fantastic, like, specific examples of what this looks like. So I guess the answer would be something to the effect of, how do you incentivize sort of continual learning in all the places, including places where where people aren't necessarily flexing those muscles as much. You know, like, we talk about lifelong learning a lot. Most people are not practicing that. You know, mid-career reskilling is going to be increasingly important. And so investing in all the places where people can actually get onto those learning journeys is going to be important, including new, and this is maybe where AI can help, is, you know, I'm less excited about a student sitting in front of a computer getting, you know, AI tutoring all day, but if you're in the middle of a job, you know, you might not want to have to go and commute to a campus, and for someone like that, it could actually be really powerful to have, you know, a flexible learning option.
And I think for us to ensure that all of Michigan, we have to start with our earliest, our youngest learners in the state, right? I do think there has to be an emphasis. If we look to places like Gwinnett County in Georgia and how they've completely evolved their teaching and learning model to say that we're not just launching the very first AI high school in the country, we are actually ensuring that we're training our teachers, we're adjusting our curriculum, we're adjusting the policies that will ensure our youngest learners, even in elementary school, are building those durable skills and those skills that will allow them to access and apply anything connected to AI and emerging technologies. And so for us to actually ensure all Michiganders are ready, we have to start with the babies.
I think I'd add, like, I think we need a cultural reset, right? Like, we talked about learning, we talked about all these sorts of things, and often, like, how often, like, talking, the discourse, and doing are often positioned as, like, binary things. Like, oh, I'm tired of talking about things, like, let's just do. And I think the danger in that is sometimes you have solutions in search of a problem, right? Like, so I think we need to be curious, we need to be learners, and we really need to think about, like, how we are framing our families and how we're framing people, and that will then drive our approach. Like, at the top of the session, you know, the video that introduced us, I think it said, what, 92 billion in economic output could be could be achieved here in Michigan if we close the racial wealth gap, perhaps, or maybe even some other things. But my point in that is we often think about these problems as binary. We often think about this like zero-sum game when in the state of Michigan, we truly could be the tech and innovation hub that we want to be if we think about the ways in which society could benefit as a whole, and that starts in local communities.
You know, you both hit on something. Tiffany talked about the earliest learners, your piece, and actually you're reading the cards before you even ask the questions. So definitely mind readers here. And so one of the questions here is that how do we reset the vision for young people to really harness the power of this tool, to make it really real and impactful for them, not just now, but also how they'll be able to benefit and use it as they're older as well, too, and entering the workforce, education, higher education.
Yeah. I think it goes back to some of the things that we've hopefully been trying to instill in our students is their own exploration of their purpose, right, and their passion, right? Not just the content that they are getting access or the tools that they're getting access to, and supporting them in that, and actually saying, I am here to stand in your greatness until you can fully step into it. And I think that is the piece that's actually going to allow our youngest learners to take hold and become the rightful leaders of our community and our city and our state if we actually focus on that. And the tools, again, are just that, a tool that will amplify their own brilliance and their passion and their purpose. I think we have drifted away in some instances from trying to force either a pathway. For 5 years, it was all about STEM. Then it was all about STEAM. Then it was all about, okay, let's focus on STEAM and durable skills. Oh, nope, we got to make sure we go back to the basics and make sure that they can, add, subtract, and multiply. And it's like, actually, if we could pause and actually have conversations with our young people and our young leaders and believe in their potential, I think some of the things that, as you and I talked about way back in the day is that I actually think the problem is with the adults because we don't actually believe that our students can achieve what we're setting in front of them. And so I think that will be the thing that actually fuels our students to actually lead, become the leaders that we need them to be in this moment in time as emerging technologies continue to evolve.
And as we wrap here, as I'm getting the signal here, because I want to make sure we're on time.
Yeah.
So I want to leave the room as well to a call to action. And for each one of you, with the 3 minutes, 4 seconds that we've got left here as well, too. If you had one bold, immediate action to help position Michigan as its national leader in equitable AI innovation, what would it be, Alex?
I mean, we just need to get started. And so, I think, if you know of a education leader, or policymaker, anybody that's willing to take this on, this will be a defining moment for our time. And, there are folks out there that are looking to, for an opportunity to sort of like set their legacy. But we need those folks to actually raise their hand and stand up. And there's organizations like ours that are ready to go and do that work, but we can't do it alone in Michigan. So Michigan, needs its leaders.
Jamal?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think we need to, or one of the things that we could do, right? You can debate how bold it is. I think we need to establish like neutrally located, like tech innovation labs that are situated inside of like targeted neighborhoods. Often that work is elevated to higher ed, but I think one of the unintended consequences of that is, it presents a competitive advantage for higher ed. But if it's located in neighborhoods, it's a community asset, right? So like, what are the ways in which we could support young people in actively practicing AI and learning cybersecurity and data engineering, whether that's like by day, school field trips, after school programs. We can create, tuition-free career training, maybe even go beyond tuition-free. Yeah. Perhaps it's like earn and learn. People are being paid to learn. Apprenticeship models, like all those sorts of things that really like reduce the barrier to upskilling and reskilling because it's super expensive. I often think about like in entrepreneurship when ideas are showing promise. What do? Like we continue to invest in those ideas, but in the social sector, what we do is we pull back when funders say, our priorities have shifted. Or, you know what I mean? Or it's, what's your sustainability plan? I'm thinking, you know what I mean? So, right? So like, what are the ways in which we can give ideas time to mature, and we can use nonprofits as like, R&D for social good. I think all of that stuff could happen in these like neutrally located labs.
Tiffany, last word. Close us out and bring us home.
Oh, Lord. So I'll keep it short. And so I would say yes to everything that Alex and Jamon surfaced. I said I've been dreaming of a Michigan AI Equity Innovation Fund. And if you're interested in that, I would love to talk to you about it and hopefully get into partnership with folks. But I will close with something that our friends over at New Profit always talks about. They talk about the mic. They talk about multiracial, intergenerational, cross-sector work. And so whatever we do, be it a lab, be it investing in our teachers, be it changing and evolving teaching and learning, it has to be multiracial, it has to be intergenerational, and it has to be cross-sector. So that's what I'm hoping for Michigan.
Consider us closed. Everyone, can you thank our panelists as well?